All right, so good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our next episode of the Pace Changing Minds webinar series. Today we have Ken Schroeder, Digitalization product manager, with Epiroc. And I'll give you a little bit of an introduction to Ken. So Ken is a professional engineer. He's got a deep experience base in operational excellence. He's worked with a variety of industries, a variety of companies in an operational excellence capacity over the last 18 years, past 10, both mining and oil and gas. Served a number of clients, including Cliffs Natural Resources, Cenovus Energy, BHP, Barrick. Ken's philosophy is that processes need to be stabilized before they can be improved, and I agree with Ken on that. As I mentioned, Ken is currently the digital product manager for Epiroc and leading the drive to enable digital technology to support operational excellence in the underground, and that is our title of our webinar today, Supporting Operational Excellence Through Mine Digitalization. So Ken, happy to have you with us today.
Thank you, Derek. So before you hand it off to me, Derek, I'll just give a little bit of an intro on a few things just to take off from what you were talking about. For people who don't know what Epiroc is, we used to be Atlas Copco. So Atlas Copco supplied, if people know Atlas Copco, things like compressors and vacuum equipment and tools, hand tools and things like this. And then there was all the mining side of things, drills and scoops, trucks, bolters, etc. And what was decided with Epiroc itself was that they were really focusing, or Atlas Copco was really kind of focusing on more the compressors and the tools part of things, and that the whole mining equipment thing, from a board of directors point of view, wasn't necessarily, getting the attention it needed. Hence, Epiroc was formed. And as of this June, I believe it is, Epiroc will be a completely separate company from Atlas Copco with its own board of directors and whatnot, just focusing exclusively on mining equipment and mining systems. So that's how Epiroc came to be. And what Epiroc stands for is, it's from Greek, and epi means at or on, and then rock or roca means on rock. So that's the story of why Epiroc is what Epiroc is. So a little bit on my background is what Derek was alluding to. I've really been in this continuous improvement operational excellence field since 2001 in a number of different industries, and the last 10 almost exclusively into mining, and then I've had a year in oil and gas. I've gained things along my way and kind of figured out what things work and what things don't work in terms of an approach to continuous improvement or operational excellence, and going to bring that to the presentation today, and then how a digital platform supports that to be able to go forward. And there's a number of reasons, when we look at digitization and innovation today, of why people do things, and everybody talks about data being the new currency, and when you think about digitalization, people worry about jobs disappearing, that can be automated, etc. There's things of why people or why companies go to digitalization. It's around things like efficiencies, being able to do things quicker, easier. There's a number of different reasons. One of the bigger ones out there nowadays is that if I can more automate and digitize, I can get to ore bodies now that are deeper and more remote that I couldn't necessarily get to before. And so things like ventilation is far less required. The amount of people in the underground is far less. And ore bodies which were maybe not profitable to mine now become profitable to mine with the world of going more digital. What I'm going to talk about today is, so that's one aspect of why we want to be able to digitize. I'm going to talk about today another aspect of it, and it's with current operations today. How do we strengthen our current operations? And it's really around strengthening what is called operational excellence. And operational excellence has a few definitions, and one of the biggest definitions I've seen when I was with that Valley was that as metals turn down in price, it's to be able to withstand those times where you're less dependent upon the price of metals and you can still make a profit. And today we're going to talk about how digitization supports the underground operational excellence system. So I can take, is it ready to go, Derek?
Yeah, no, I just want to, I'm going to just let everybody know, if you have any questions throughout the conversation, throughout the presentation today, you can type them into your chat window, and we will see them pop up. And when I get a second to cut in, I'll bring those questions up to Ken, and we'll get those questions answered, hopefully as we go. If not, we'll try to capture them at the end. So don't be afraid to ask questions using your chat window throughout the session, and we'll get to those as early an opportunity as we have to do so. All right, Ken. So I will hand that off to you, and take it away.
We're good to go. There we go. Okay, got to click. Yeah. Oh, that didn't do it. Okay. So what? There we go. It was a bit too quick. What I'm going to take you through today is kind of two stories. The first story is what does this operational excellence thing mean? And then I'm going to take you through, well, how does a digital underground support operational excellence? So I've got two questions for everybody if they want to take a minute with it to be able to answer it. We're going to go back to what operational excellence is, and you may have heard of things like lean manufacturing and other things. And I got two questions here. So if you think, what is the primary objective of a lean manufacturing system? So being in an automotive, underground, you name it, it does not matter. And if you think about operating in the underground, what are the three major forms of waste that impact the underground? I'll just take a minute there and see if people have any thoughts or questions about, or any thoughts on that. Just give it a minute and then I'll provide the answers.
Got any answers, please type them into your chat window or your question. Okay, so we've got one answer with a couple things in there: to remove waste, improve efficiency, and reduce costs. Another person talked about time and reducing time. Anyone else got anything different? Okay. Reducing fill. That could be. Ken, you want to give us the answers there?
All right. So what everybody's mentioned, Derek, are all very good examples and very specific about it. I'm going to back up just, we're going to come down to those specifics of what people have talked about, but I'm going to back it up just one level higher than that. So the primary objective from a lean manufacturing system, from what I see, let's see, is to maximize what we call value-added activities, right? And these are activities roughly defined as what the customer is willing to pay for. And what we want to reduce is activities that the customer really doesn't want to pay for. So a value-added activity in an underground might be something like moving muck, right? Moving it from a muck pile onto a truck and taking it to surface. A non-value-added activity might be something around, well, I had to move that muck pile 3 times before it finally got there. So that's kind of what the objective of a lean manufacturing system is. And then the 3 major forms of waste in underground is what we call Overburden. Let's see where that last one's coming up. There we go. Overburden, what we call, you know, some people or some jobs have more burden on them than what other jobs do. So the workload is not the same. The other one mentioned in there is what we call variation. And variation, you know, it'd be great if every task was the same day in and day out, but it's not that case. And then the last one is what we call waste itself, and there are 7 forms of it. So where it jumps, we're going to jump in now to the agenda for the presentation. I'm going to talk about those 3 forms of waste, of instability versus stability, what we call variation. There's 7 specific forms of waste, and burden. And the way we combat those forms of, those 3 major forms of waste, is through what we call the stability platform. And the stability platform, that is implemented to be able to combat these wastes. And it's comprised of 3 pillars, what's called standard work, workplace organization, control and response. And we do this through engaging our workforce. So I'm going to take us through a bit of a chat on what those 2 major bullets are up at the top. Then we're going to get into, well, what is the value proposition of the digital mine? You know, why do I want to do this with respect to those 2 major bullets up above? And then I'm going to talk about specifically a product out there, what we call the Mobile Aris Mining Intelligence System, which Epiroc represents. And really, it's about an integrated digital platform. You know, it's about all the different technologies coming together to strengthen that stability platform. And then what can we get out of this ultimately in the end if we go down this road of providing a digital platform? All right. So 3 forms of waste. We're going to talk about here moving towards a stable process. There we go. I'll make sure it doesn't go too fast. Okay, it did anyway. All right, so on the left side, and I'm sure everybody who's been involved in the underground or mining operations, you know, the left side of this is a pretty typical process, right? It's what we call variation. And I have a control chart here that shows, you know, my mining tons per day might average 1,800, but it could be all the way up to 4,300 and as low as 0, right? If you have that process, that's a pretty hard process to predict or plan for. So when a guy goes underground, and I've seen it many times, you know, you ask the supervisor, well, how many tons you're going to get, or the operator, you know, how many tons you're going to muck today? And the answer comes back, well, it depends. And given that history on the left side, that's a very valid answer. It really does depend, right? Because it's just an unstable process. I'm as likely to have 0 tons per day as I am likely to have up 4,300 tons a day, as I am very likely to have 1,800 tons a day. So if you have that process, it's very hard to be able to make targets. And what we try to be able to do over time is stabilize this process out and reduce its variation and move more to the right side. So what I've essentially done there is the average has moved up a little bit, but I've made it, I have really very much stabilized anywhere between 500 all the way up to 3,700. Now, if I drop below 500 or 530 here in this case, it tells me something truly is wrong. It's just not a representation of it's just not a normal day. Now I can actually do something. We're trying to sort the wheat from the chaff in here. So that is just a little bit about variation. All right. The next one we have here is about reducing waste in the system. And I know through the guys I've worked, oh, geez, this wants to jump back and forth. There we go.
A little bit of a lag there for you, Ken. So
I know. I just got to remember that. There's 7 ways in the system, what we call TIMWOOD, or TIMWOODs if we actually added safety onto the end of it. And it's the way of looking at our processes of being able to say, okay, if we're trying to be able to do a job, you know, there's things that impact me from providing these value-added activities. And there are various categories of them. if you look at any type of job, and one is transportation, right? An example of that is moving a muck pile multiple times. If I truly want to be able to reduce the non-value added activities in my system, I would try to reduce the amount of times I may have to move a muck pile. Inventory, and I know people can relate to this one, especially in the underground. Try to find stuff. You know, it was on the surface, it's now disappeared when it went down the ramp. And in many cases in inventory, we may have too much of what we don't need and not enough of what we do need. When I look at something like excess motion, it could be the amount of times on a setup to be able to drill a long hole, the amount of work and movements it takes to get a good setup. We spend a heck of a lot of time doing setup, and everybody's got different ways of doing it. An example of waiting in the underground is waiting on prints or waiting on information, where guys wait, you know, I don't have a print, I can't go underground, or I don't have instructions, right? These are all leading to waste in our system. Overproduction. Now, this is an interesting one, because in a mining environment, and I keep hearing it over and over, well, there is no such thing as overproduction. We can never seem to make enough tons. Well, there is, and from the point of view that if you look at it, that if I spend so much time producing and mucking from a specific stope or specific stopes, I'm not spending as much time planning and preparing for future stopes, right? So I can overmuck some areas and not be ready for other areas. Overprocessing, which is making things more complicated than what they need to be. And that could be a drill letter, right, where we've got a lot more information in it than maybe what the driller needs. It needs to be there, but maybe not for the driller. And then defects, basically re-drills as an example, not doing it right the first time. So those are two examples so far of two of the three major wastes in the system: variation, and then the 7 wastes. And then also too, just quickly on, with regards to burden on a supervisor or operator, you know, if you think about it from a supervisor point of view, you know, they have so many tasks in the underground that they're trying to be able to get done. They spend a lot of time firefighting. There's not enough time to do other types of work. So how do we combat these 3 major forms of waste? There we go. I'm going to back it up one. Okay. Nope. There, I think now I'm getting the hang of this. There we go. Oh, went too fast.
Why don't you use your down arrow or your page down?
Oh, that's a good idea. Okay.
You need to keep it 1 click at a time.
Good idea. I was using my mouse. Okay, the stability platform. This is how we combat those 3 major forms of waste. First one, standard work. And what standard work is about is the current best practice used in the workplace, right? So we want our guys to try to all be able to run to the same practice, right? And we continue, as we gain new information, we update the current best work practice. So that's one way of combating these 3 things, especially around variation. Workplace organization, people may think of this as 5S, and really what this one is about is having the workplace organized for the work to be done. Especially in the underground, when I look at storage areas and things like this, and where tools and equipment are maintained, you know, the less time we have to spend looking for things, and the more organized a workplace is, the better off we are. Last one, control and response. And where this ties into, especially in the digital world, is short interval control. However, control and response is really about, if something goes wrong, how do we respond to those deviations? And everyone has different ways of being able to respond to things. So really, there's an element of standard work that goes into that, such that when things happen, this is the way we respond to minimize things going off the rails as quickly as possible. The only way these 3 elements work is by engaging our people and what we call the ABCs of behavioral science. And I'm going to explain some concepts around that, how we engage the workforce when we're trying to be able to do these three pillars of combating waste. So standard work. What's standard work about? So briefly, standard work is a hypothesis that's made up of three things: content, sequence, timing, and outcome. And the theory goes that, and when we're developing a best practice, if we do the right work in the right sequence according to the prescribed timing, we should obtain the desired result. So standard work is more than just a written procedure or SOP. It's really about, this is how we want a job to do. This is the sequence we want it to go in. This is how long it should take. And if we do these things right, this is the outcome that we should ultimately get in the end. And within that piece of standard work, what you're trying to be able to do is also put in countermeasures such that if something goes wrong at this point, this is the action you could take to get you back on time. So that's one pillar of our stability platform. And I've just showed a quick example on the right, which is a crew change standard for how crews are able to work in their shift in the underground, indicating time to be able to do things and various things like that. All right, let's see the lags. Oh. Okay, example of workplace organization. Bolter warehouse, just real quick example. You can see on the left for screen storage as compared to after it's been organized on the right. So on the left, it's hard to know how many bundles you have. It's dark. You've got other materials laying around as compared to the right, where things are well more lit, properly labeled, and from that particular point of view, it's sitting on a cement pad. If I look at left to right, it's a lot easier to control my inventory on the right, to know exactly what I've got, and maybe also too when I need to be able to restock. We spend a lot of time in the underground looking for stuff because it goes all over the place. Whereas if storages are kept organized, we spend a lot less time looking for things. Just a quick example on workplace organization. Third pillar of what this control and response is. Right? So what we try to be able to do is when we put in something, an improvement activity on something, we want a plan in place to maintain things under control. We spend a whole lot of time working to improve things, but over time, things always seem to drift back. And one of the ways of trying to be able to address this is what we call a control plan or control and response. So really, it's a plan to say, if things go off the rails, how are we going to get it back in and who does what? And I think this is one of the biggest areas of where a digital platform can really help us with regards to this control and response. Oh, I'm going to back that up. It's pretty laggy up here.
Yeah, I would imagine.
Yeah, it's pretty laggy.
There we go.
There we go. Now it ended up on my side. Okay. So the right side is just a quick example of a control plan. So what I showed earlier was that piece of standard work for how a shift is to be conducted. And then to make sure that that standard sticks and in place, there's what we call a control plan that sits in behind that measures things like truck engine hours, where they expect, or equipment engine hours, where that expectation should be, how, if guys are not following the standard, what should be done from that particular point of view. It's really meant to say, how do we keep this standard in place? And my experience has been when we've done these things and we've built new standards, then one of the most difficult things is we got a standard going, we've trained guys and things are going, but how do we keep everything to task and make sure that we don't slip back? So this is kind of where we get into that third and last piece is, guys will only follow standards when they want to follow standards, when there's a true consequence behind, this is how I want to be able to do my work and I want to be able to follow my standards. So, and doing anything within our life. So I'm going to talk a little bit about here behavior and how this underpins those three elements of the stability platform. So how do we influence behavior? So a little bit around behavior. So the first thing is what we call the ABCs. So first thing is antecedent. right? So if you want someone, or we all engage in behavior, whatever that is, and the behavior is what a person does or says, right? We have something that prompts that behavior, right? So in the mining world or any other world, we spend a heck of a lot of time on prompting the behavior, right? So there's standards, there's signs, there's procedures, etc., right, to be able to prompt behavior, right? Next thing, I give you an antecedent. Now I actually do something in that behavior. So the behavior is what the person says or does, right? So at the beginning of a shift, I give as a supervisor, I give a lineup to the guys to go underground. That's the antecedent. The behavior is okay, the guy takes his lineup and then he goes and does work. The third thing, right? How do we influence behavior? Is the consequence, right? So the guy goes underground and does that work. He may follow the standard, he may not follow the standard, he may have to change from standard just due to the conditions he's working in, etc. So what comes out of every behavior is a consequence. And this is where the rubber kind of meets the road. So if we want somebody to follow standards and do work, we have to provide them a positive consequence to be able to do that. We spend a heck of a lot of time on antecedent to be able to prompt the right behavior, but where a lot of times we don't seem to want to spend time is on this consequence, to provide the consequence to the guy in the workplace. And when I mean consequence, I'm talking about positive consequences as opposed to negative consequences. We want to encourage the right behavior of people doing things, and we want to catch people doing things correctly. We want to catch them in the act of doing things correctly, because that will more encourage the behavior than not. So our digital platform in the underground's all meant to try to be able to improve these consequences to keep driving the right behaviors. Okay, understanding behavior, just a little bit more on this. So if I want somebody to do something, right, there's 4 elements here, what we call direction, competence, opportunity, and motivation. So I want someone to go do a job. The first thing I need to be able to do is direction, right? So I need to be able to give them goals, work instructions, a lineup, such that this is your work for the day, right? If I want someone to go do a job, they can't do it unless I give them a direction of what I want done. So pretty simple. Next one is competence. If they don't have competence, they can't get the job done. So I want them to go hang vent pipe, but if they're not trained in how to be able to hang vent pipe, and they don't have standards around hanging vent pipe, they can't hang vent pipe. Third thing, opportunity. So giving them a lineup, I want you to hang vent pipe, they're trained in hanging vent pipe. If they can't get to the workplace, right, then they can't hang it. So that's barriers, right? I got to remove barriers for people to be able to do the work that I want them to do. The first 3 here are all functions of management, right, or supervision. The last one is motivation. People choose to do things either because either they will or will not do them, right? And what we're trying to be able to move people from is a have to a want to. We want to move their motivation to wanting to do a job as opposed to having to do a job. So this is where the digital platform can help us with the first 3, and especially on the last one with regards to motivating and providing those positive consequences.
That's great. I heard a great term the other day, Ken, and we're talking about that. It was that the term of discretionary effort.
Yes.
And people wanting to put in that extra bit of effort, and that's the one you really have to work at with people to get that discretionary effort out of them.
Right.
I like that term.
That only comes through, Derek, when you provide positive consequences. And we're going to talk a little bit about how to provide those consequences. So,
right.
Okay, cascade of behavior to drive performance, right? Yeah, there it is. So we have 4 levels, typically L1 through L4 in an underground mine: operator, supervisor, general foreman, superintendent, right? If I look at the operator level, starting on down here, right? What is the behavior I want out of the operator? Well, I want them to follow standard methods when doing work. I want them to be able to do it safely. I want them to be able to be engaged in fixing problems. You know, I want them to be able to meet their daily production goals, right? And as Derek, as you were saying, you know, geez, if we can get that discretionary effort out of them to be able to going beyond what they have to do to what they want to do.
Mm-hmm.
The way we do that, right, is the primary job of the supervisor, his behavior is to provide positive consequences to that operator. Well, how's that done? Right? If I'm an operator, you know, and I'm trying to be able to do work, if I know that the work is important, right, and I can count on my supervisor being there to help me through the work and take genuine interest in my work and talk to me about my work, I'm more likely to be able to do that. So what does that behavior of the supervisor become? We want that supervisor to spend time in the stope, working with his guys to help them problem solve, to help them get through their day, understand that the work that they're doing, and provide feedback, right? So feedback could be, you know, are we on task? Are we behind task? Are there things that we need to be able to do? The more ability we give that supervisor or others to do that type of work, to be able to work with the operators, the more likely the operators are to be able to get things done from that perspective. So the digital platform, and I'll be getting to it, helps us do that, to be able to get the supervisor in a better position to do some of these things. From a supervisor's role now, I, as the production general foreman, now my main job is to provide my main job or my main behavior is to provide consequences for the supervisor. So the supervisor needs to know, you know, that someone there cares about the work that I am doing. And how do we do that? Or an example of how we do that. You know, at the end of the shift or throughout the shift, you know, the GF is working with the supervisor and they're having discussion about what's going on, right? And I know it can be difficult to do with workloads and things like this, but the more opportunities we have to engage with our supervisors from a GF point of view, the more opportunity the supervisors will be able to complete and follow tasks to the way we want to do things. And so at the end of the day, an example of that type of behavior is when the supervisor comes back up, you know, how was our day? What problems do we have? Let's talk about the issues and describe them and problem solve through that, right? So it's really about engaging in these type of conversations to help the supervisor out. And again, the digital platform will help us be able to do that so we can have very meaningful conversations. So that's a little bit behind behavior. And then the superintendent level, I'm not going to get into that, also is his behaviors to reinforce with the general foreman. Consequence characteristics. If we want to get that discretionary behavior out of people from any type of level, this is what we got to be able to do. So consequence is an event that follows the behavior. A consequence can increase, decrease, or maintain the behavior. And the characteristics of the most powerful consequences. So if we want the operator to give, you know, to the best of his ability, let's say he's loading holes to complete it on time, this is how we motivate the operators to be able to do it. We want to provide them with consequences that happen soon after the behavior, right? So if the guys got the holes all loaded, right, or they're having difficulties loading the holes, right, we want to provide them a positive consequence that someone is there to be able to help them do that. It's got to be important to the performer. So if a guy is loading holes and, you know, the supervisor comes and talks to him about, well, we're doing a good job or we're not doing a good job, or I want you to do it this way, and the operators or the guy loading the hole says, no, I really couldn't care less, right? Then we have to change our consequences. And the last thing is it has to have a high probability of occurring. So if I'm a guy doing a job and I'm having difficulty getting it done, and my consequence history has told me that no one is going to come and help me be able to do this, then why should I do anything different? Because if I ask for help, my history has told me it's not going to help. I'm not going to get anything. So we want to catch people in the act of doing it right to reinforce that behavior. And then the only way we can catch people in the act of doing it right is we've got to provide time and the ability for people to have conversations with the guys in the underground. And what we're trying to be able to do is always provide a minimum of 4 positive consequences to 1 negative consequence at the minimum to get this discretionary behavior. Consequence power, this is our last slide on behavior. Right? So when we're providing consequences to people, right, we want to make sure that the consequence we provide either encourages or discourages the behavior. We want to make sure that if we're providing a consequence to someone, that the timing can be experienced as immediately after the behavior as possible, right? So if people are having problems, a guy's having a problem getting work done in the underground, you know, it'd be nice if we're able to provide them feedback as quickly as we can. You know, if I'm waiting forever on drill plans or things like that because I can't get it to me quickly, right? Then the behavior we want if the guy's to be able to drill those holes, you know, he can't be able to do it. Importance, right? So the consequence needs to be of high importance or to the performer to be able to keep engaging in this behavior. And the last part is that probability, right? Is the supervisor likely to talk to me every day about my work? Or is it just some of the time he does?
That's great.
Right, and what we want to try to be able to do is tip the balance of these consequences so that we get the discretionary behavior out of people. So we always want to make sure that whatever the consequences we provide encourages the behavior we want, that they experience it immediately after doing the work, that it's important to them, and that it's probable that they're going to get it. So I've spent a lot of time talking about behavior here. And the reason why is that if we're in the underground doing any type of job, even though we digitalize it, people are still people. So we want to make sure that whatever tools we provide to help people do their jobs, we've got to make sure it's in the right context to still get that discretionary behavior. So we just can't think about machines and you know, systems and things like that. We're ultimately still driving how people do their work, and we're still structuring how people perform their work. So that's why I've spent a lot of time with this, just to be able to set the background on it. Okay, so we've talked about this stability platform, standard work, workplace organization, control and response. And now I'm going to get into and engaging our workforce. And now I'm going to get into, well, we've talked about all those things. We use those things to try to be able to improve our operations, right? However, we need to be able to continually strengthen that, right? And it's about real-time information to really be able to strengthen this. So there's our stability platform. Again, the elements we've talked about, the 3 elements in the platform. There we go. So how can I make this platform stronger? You know, how can I do standard work better? How can I do workplace organization better? How can I do control and response better? How can I help people, you know, engage our workforce better? And the value proposition around a digital underground is providing data in real time so that we can do these things better. If I look at something like standard work, if I give you data on how a task is performing, and guys have different ways of doing it, If I give you real-time data after the standards are done, then I know from the point of view of how we can improve that, because I've got data to base an improvement on that, or who does it well and who doesn't it well. If I look at something around workplace organization, if I provide you data on workplace organization, then I know where tools and equipment are and where things are going, and I'm not spending forever to be able to look at that. If I give you data on control and response, and I know when things are starting to go off the rails before they've gone a whole shift off the rails, boy, oh boy, it makes it a lot easier to respond to things, to deviations in that underground, because I can take actions much quicker. If I provide you data on engaging our people, then I have real information about how somebody is doing a job that I can have a real meaningful discussion with somebody in the underground, how to be able to do that. So it's really about trying to be able to provide data. Standard work, workplace organization, control and response, and engaging our people. That's what we're trying to be able to do with the digital system. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Mobile Aris now as that digital integration platform to be able to do this. It's the product that Epiroc represents, and the reason why we're trying to be able to do this. So what is Mobile Aris? Well, it's really kind of two things. The first thing is what you see in front of you, which is the reality or the digital product that if I was to give it to you in your hand or virtually, this is what you would see. I would see a 3D map of my underground, and I could see my assets moving around from Wi-Fi tags. That's kind of the physical product. But what it also does is it integrates all these other products in the digital platform to make a real management system. If I have a strong management system, that is some digital platform that I can use from that point of view, and I have a strong operational excellence mentality in behind it, I can really control my underground, and I can continue to improve how I strengthen that underground. So Mobile Aris is really about this 3D map and then integrating all these other platforms to make a true digital platform in the underground. So how do we do this? Well, if you have a digital underground, and I know Joe's talked about it along with other Lars from Boliden, you know, what does a digital underground look like? Well, I have a digital infrastructure. And what I'm doing is through Wi-Fi or other technologies, taking information back up from how machines and personnel are working, feeds up into this platform. Okay, what also feeds into this platform? Well, typically the way of scheduling right now is to be able to take, you know, a long-term plan down to a medium-term plan down to a short-term plan that might look at a month, and then translating that into a weekly plan. And then after that weekly plan is generated, it's give it to the supervisor, and every day he makes a lineup on paper and hands it off to his guys, and off they go, right? That's my digital plan for the day. What we're moving towards more now is somebody that's really taking a task scheduler and looking at the work through an integrated thought of maintenance, production, development, and looking at all these tasks every day and helping organize between the different elements to say, these are the tasks of the day. So that's my plan. This plan feeds into the system. What comes out of this system is that this is my plan. I go ahead and execute my work, and then I'm able to say, okay, how is my work really performing with respect to my plan? And is there things that can be changed throughout the day? The other thing that happens moving more towards this operator client idea is that I can send information down to the guys working in a workplace through the use of an iPad or something else similar, where they can record their work, they have access to all the information that they need, and then they can send information back. So all this goes into this Mobile Aris system where we're holding, you know, we have this digital platform, And at the end of the day, I can say, did I make plan? And if I didn't, where did we go wrong? And what can we do about not repeating it? So there's a whole bunch of information flow in this digital platform, and it really helps us strengthen that stability foundation that we talked about. So I'm going to get into now about how more specifically this digital platform affects those three pillars of the stability platform: workplace organization, standard work, and control and response, and then how it helps us become better at engagement from our workforce.
Great.
Okay, expectations from an integrated digital system. Okay, so the first one we talked about is waste, right? Remember those 7 wastes that we talked about: transportation, inventory, waiting, motion, overproduction, overprocessing, and defects. Well, you know, when we go into our shift, right, we're subjected to this waste all day long. And if I look at it, you know, from a 10-hour shift or any type of shift, right, we lose a lot of time on average just managing these wastes, right? So I go underground in my day, and if I have a hard time finding equipment and tools, boy, it can take a long time before I even get to work. You know, if I don't know where my fueling is at, or I've got a whole bunch of guys lined up to be able to fuel, you know, I again lose time in trying to be able to get my work done. A lot of times you will have things where we have to drop guys off at various workplaces, and there's limited transportation at that. So who and how that transportation gets lined up, right, can take a fair amount of time to get people dropped off. And we may be dropping people off that should be going to work first, and other jobs are less priority. We also don't necessarily know how long we spend in a stope, when work actually starts, and when work actually ends. We also have opportunities now too, and I've seen this typically happen, where you have a whole bunch of crews working in a limited area with limited power, limited ventilation. You know, and you ask yourself, well, how did I get to that? Also too, from the point of view of traffic management, you know, we go up and down drifts or roadways, haulage ways, and with regards to who has priority and who's arriving and on what time. We spend a lot of time looking for inventory and supplies. You know, that's a waste too on that end, right? Ventilation, from an energy and efficiency point of view, cost, right? We don't need to ventilate everywhere we work. And it'd be nice to be able to turn on or have ventilation where we need it. And then the also point of view too is responding to alarms, right? We can spend a lot of time, you know, what alarms are happening when, you know, how long does it take to maintenance to be able to get there? Wouldn't it be nice if we knew we were starting to have problems before they actually turn into big issues from that point of view? So from a digital point of view, if I have the opportunity to be able to measure these things and see them occurring in real time, I can organize my work a heck of a lot better to start minimizing these type of wastes. It'd be great at the beginning of a shift if you know, I had an equipment log that was printed out based on true data of where all my equipment was. That if I set up a standard on managing fueling priorities, you know, that guys are actually following that standard. If I knew what time you know, our first bolt goes in, or our first bucket occurs, and it's an hour and a half from the time that we were supposed to start, I can start problem solving around those various type of things. If I knew from a scheduling point of view that comes out and says, oh boy, we got a whole bunch of people working in the same area, let's readjust our schedule. I have all these opportunities now where I can reduce that waste, and that only comes with if I have data, information that I can look at how things are performing. That's how we attack that type of waste.
Right.
Ooh, there we go. Variation. So this goes back to that control and response that I've talked about. So we give somebody a lineup to be able to go and do work. right? And their job may be, I want you to go muck 9240, crosscut 25 today, right? So sign a couple trucks and a scoop to be able to go do that. So you think at the end of the day, well, I might be able to get 110 buckets out of this place. What happens if it doesn't go that way, which is usually a very typical day? You know, it could be, okay, I got a broken, you know, I had a flat tire, get on the phone or get on the radio, get a hold of my supervisor. The supervisor's there, yeah, I'll get there when I can. Let's figure this out. You know, or the supervisor doesn't know whether trucks could be in the area or what from that perspective. So what we're trying to be able to do is minimize this variation. You know, some days we get 100 buckets out of there, some days we get 50 buckets. Wouldn't it be great if every day I got 80 or 90 buckets from that point of view? One of the ways of being able to combat that is through what we call short interval control, such that if things are starting to go off the rails, I know about it a lot quicker than I knew about it at the end of the shift. And how do we do the short interval control? Well, think of it as a control room where I'm actually seeing tasks being carried out in real time, where my assets are moving, where my people are moving, and what my machine data is coming back. And I can respond to things before they really start getting off the rails. So that's about coming up with my plan and my actual, right? And then if I have a standard plan now to say that if I'm experiencing these type of problems, how do I respond to it? We also want to implement that form of standard work, because an operator in a control room or different operators, different supervisors will still have different ways of responding to things, even if you give them a whole bunch of information to make decisions from. So again, we want to standardize how we do things. The other thing with short interval control or reducing this variation is, wouldn't it be great if we could help guys make decisions in the underground? So one example that I think about when I was doing work for Barrick is that we're drilling a slot and we've run a hole. Most of the time it's left up to the operator to figure out where he wants that redrill to go. Or if he wants that redrill, or he has to wait for his the drilling engineer to come by and be able to do that. In a digital world, if that operator was to be able to get a hold of the engineer on the surface, they could have that discussion a lot quicker as opposed to the end of the shift or the next day. And then the decision of where to put that redrill would be done based on fact and consultation, as opposed to the way it's mostly done now, that the guy an operator will say, well, I think this is probably the best spot based on my experience. The other thing where I think of being able to reduce this variation is in cleaning and loading holes. You know, give a sheet at the beginning of the shift for the cleaning crew. They go down, you know, these are the holes I want cleaned from the blasting engineer, right? They go down there and they figure out I can't clean these holes, or I've tried to clean these holes. And then before you know it, the information comes back up at the end of the shift. The engineer doesn't have a chance till the next day to review that cleaning information. And then most likely what's happened is those holes have gotten loaded over the night. So if I can streamline this communication and get data back real time, maybe it's a conversation that the engineer has with the blast crew partway through the shift on how is the cleaning going and where are we at. So there's a lot of ways that if I can provide this information quicker and easier, I'm reducing the variation. Burden. So this last major form of waste is what we've talked about is burden. So we've talked about variation, the 7 wastes, and now what we're going to talk about here is burden. So if we talk about providing positive consequences for operators and supervisors, etc., they need the ability to be able to do this type of work. I see the digital underground is very much changing how people do their work today. And if we're trying to be able to get people to look at work and perform work in a different way, then we need to be able to provide them positive consequences. And one of the ways of providing these positive consequences is reducing the burden. If I look at the new jobs or different jobs of what we want people to be able to do or change their job, it'd be great if we got a supervisor out of firefighting, even though they may like doing that a lot, and more time spending on observation and coaching. You know, supervisors understand the work, but maybe they don't understand it to a level of detail to be able to help out a driller a lot of times, right? And the only way they're going to be able to understand that is if they're given more time to be able to do that. And to be able to do that, we need to be able to remove burden from their point of view. So if I want a supervisor to spend more time in the stope, to spend more time, you know, pre-planning for upcoming drill headings or muck headings, then I need to be able to change the way they're working. I don't want them spending, you know, half a shift being able to complete a shift log. You know, wouldn't it be great if a lot of this data pre-populated itself from this digital system or this integrated digital system, getting them more time to be able to actually spend more time in the stopes planning and things like this. So what we're really trying to do with this digital underground is remove this burden. So if I have information that flows easier and quicker and goes to different resources such as a control room to help dedicate tasks under short interval control, it's really freeing up more time for the supervisor to be able to do things. Okay, digital expectations, right? Supporting behavior, the last piece here on discussion, right? So if I want somebody to do a job, I have to be able to provide direction, competence, and opportunity. And the first one is direction. So if I have a digital underground, now I can maybe providing more targets. You know, maybe we get to the point based on history where there's an automatic analysis that is done in the background based on your history that says, as opposed to getting, you know, I don't know what I'm going to get out of this stope today, you know, it may develop a target that's realistic. It's going to be 500 tons based on how you've done, right? I also have the ability now to get procedures and drawings to operators or supervisors in a digital format to provide them the information they need to be able to do things. Competence. In a digital system or digital underground, right, I can provide real-time support to a fellow doing work in the underground, and if they're not understanding how to be able to do something because they just don't have the competence, maybe I can provide that information now remotely. Or if the supervisor has more time now, he can be able to come over and work with an operator on problem solving. Mm-hmm. Opportunity, right? So give somebody a job, the direction, they're competent in doing it. If they spend all day looking for supplies or equipment, they're not going to get that job done. If they're going into an area of uncertain ground conditions, if I knew what those ground conditions were before prior to getting in there, I wouldn't be sending that person to be able to do that work. So opportunity, finding supplies and equipment, removing these bottlenecks to executing work. The digital underground helps us do that through tracking and through understanding where people are moving in supplies. Last one on supporting behavior, right? So we want to be able to provide these positive consequences to people doing work. So as an operator, right, this is what I expect my operator to be able to do, right? This is the behavior of what I want to see from an operator. I want them to be able to follow standard methods when doing work. I want them to be able to perform the work safely with respect to the standards. I want them to be proactive in fixing problems, and I want them to work towards meeting this daily production goal. That's what I want to see out of the operator. From a supervisor's perspective, I want to see that happen. So from a supervisor's perspective, I want to provide those positive consequences to see that operator engage in this behavior. Well, how do I do that, right? So if I want to catch them in the act of doing the work right, I need to be there, right? So I need to observe the work being done, and I need to have a meaningful conversation with them about what's happening. a conversation about the work. In terms of providing positive consequence, we're also trying to be able to understand, is the work on target or is it off target, and what we need to be able to do. Part of providing meaningful consequences is a discussion with the operator around where are you at with respect to the targets that we had at the beginning of the day. Because if I have that type of conversation, it says to the operator, my work is important and somebody is paying attention to how well I'm doing it. So that's basically the supervisor providing the operator those consequences. Well, how can we make that easier from a digital underground perspective? If I actually have data, real-time data from a supervisor's perspective that understands where they're at with regards to the work, the data becomes, this discussion becomes based on fact. It doesn't become based on assumption. It doesn't become based on personality. It becomes a discussion based on fact. So my digital underground will give that to me. If I know where you're at in real time, we can have a discussion about what's really going on. If I want the supervisor to be able to provide some of this feedback, as I was saying before, he needs to have the time and his job provided to be able to do that. He needs to have some of this burden removed. So if I'm looking at something as a short interval control room atmosphere, I have more time now because some of those tasks are sent upstairs to the control room, where I, as a supervisor, can really spend some time because I've got the time and the ability now to be able to do this. So that's one way in terms of how our digital underground supports that.
All right.
That basically concludes my presentation for the day for how the digital underground supports operational excellence.
That's great, Ken. I think you did a good job covering the short interval control piece and the behaviors piece. It's one thing that I'm seeing a lot more too now, that people are moving towards short interval control, and it's surprising to me all the time, where in the past people weren't always even talking about targets or having that discussion with respect to where people are against their targets. And, you know, and that's something that really this whole move towards short interval control and the digital underground is starting to push push people into that direction, when, you know, they could have done a lot more of that in the past in other ways, but now the short interval control software and digitizing the underground is really just making that a lot easier, and making it a lot easier to have those discussions. And I think that's fantastic. Also too, and I had some exposure to the Mobile Era system. You know, don't underestimate the amount of wasted time there is in looking for equipment. Here over and over again, how much time people are spending looking for equipment in the underground workplace, and it blows my mind. I think it's fantastic that tools like Mobile Eras can really help. You know, visualize the underground, and you know, as we heard Joe Gladue talk about Chelapash and the work they did there, taking the lid off the mine is kind of what the Mobile Era software is doing in being able to see what's happening, see what's going on in the underground, which is really fantastic. That just that visibility makes things a lot easier and opens up all sorts of opportunities.
When we think of, Derek, just some good points there too, right? When I think about digitization and the digital underground, right? And you think of this whole change management behavior type thing, right? Mm. It's easy, you know, from the point of view of putting in the digital underground to help guys find equipment. You know, that really is not really intruding or something that's a whole lot new to them. You know, it's a pretty easy sell. You know, no one likes spending time, you know, looking for stuff. When you're starting to get into short interval control, and now looking at how people are doing work and the perspective that as you were saying, Derek, you know, and Joe was saying, taking the lid off the mine and watching how people work. People are not used to, you know, guys, supervisors, etc., of seeing that and knowing where it's at. You know, I hear the fiber line, you know, in a mine could be called the rat line, right? And even yeah, it's not meant to be the rat line. And this whole idea of behaviors and how people are treated, and this whole idea of short interval control rollout is what Lars is saying. It's a lot of hard work, and it's really about, you know, changing that mindset.
Yeah, absolutely. The one thing that really hit me when you talk about the DCOM, though, you know, I think in the work that I've done in mines and really everywhere, but mines specifically, the vast majority of guys just want to go to work and get their work done in the best way that they can, and they want to be able to be provided. They want to be provided the direction. They want to have the capability, and they want to have the opportunity to do a good job. And I think if these tools can do that for them, and if we can show people that these tools are going to help provide those things for them and allow them to do their work to the best of their ability, I think people really do get motivated and will want to do that. And, you know, I've seen it happen. And I think what this digital world does is it helps give the employee everything they need to be able to do the work to the best of their ability. And I think most people appreciate that. Okay, I'm going to take some questions, guys. I know we've run a little bit over time, but if anyone has any questions, please type them in, and I'll try to get to as many as I can before we sign off. It looks like most people have stuck around with us, so let's check and see if there's any questions we have in the field. You know, I did have one question, Ken, just with respect to Mobilaris. At being the platform that you talked about it being, can it be the place to house some of that data coming from equipment and things like that? Can it provide that type of platform to be a location where all of that is held and comes into?
That's exactly it, Derek. And you didn't see that end of it because I didn't want to make this about a Mobilaris presentation, but that's exactly what happens, right? You can drill down on, you know, whether a guy's doing work or you got a piece of equipment doing work, where you can drill down, let's say on a drill, and pull up in real time, you know, how many bolts has he done? Where is he at? How is he comparing to task? Do they have any equipment alarms? From that point of view, you can see in real time how that work is going. So it's an integration of machine data. It's an integration of how people are doing their work. And at the end of the day, you can roll that information up and then say, how did we do things? And then use it as a platform for problem solving to be able to improve how we just did things. You know, the whole idea of short interval control is not tripping over our same foot over the same problem and just keep reacting to it. Hopefully we're getting to the point where we're starting to solve some of these problems so we don't keep tripping them over them.
That's great. Ken, I have a question here from our good friend James, who you and I had both worked with. He was asking about the Certique system, and is there an integration between that and Mobilaris yet?
Now that is a very good question, James. And the data that you saw, or that I've seen so far, has been coming from, that I've seen through Sweden, has been coming from Epiroc equipment. And the information I've seen is from Certique with that integration. So I'll just leave it that way right now, James, and I will endeavor to find out better. We are doing a short interval control pilot with Hudbay coming up here in the next month and a half, and we're actually going to be taking Sandvik equipment data and using that within a simple scheduler and implementing short interval control to be able to improve mucking efficiency. So I think, James, as we move down that road, we'll gain more information about how all that works. I'll just leave it there for right now.
Right on. Great. He says thanks. That's awesome.
Okay.
So I just I want to remind people as I'm waiting for more questions here. We have our next webinar in our series is slated to go Thursday, April 26th, and that's with Paul Moyna. Paul's the CEO of Commit.works. They have a software package called Fusion that helps consolidate plans and bring them all together into one schedule, and also helps with the short interval control or short interval commitments, as Paul describes it. We're going to be doing with Paul a panel discussion with Paul and a few others that have used the Fusion system, Fusion software, talk about their experience with implementing short interval control. Sorry, I've got an incorrect date on there. The date for Paul's webinar is May 8th. We've got the date for our next webinar on there, which is another topic. So that's May 8th at 4 p.m. So we'll make sure we send out to everybody the correct date for that. That was today's date that I was giving you, not the next one. My bad. All right, and thanks Gord for catching that. That is today's date. I was thinking it's pretty late in April already. I don't think our next one's on the 26th. All right. So if there's any more questions, I'd like to take those now. If not, I think I'm gonna thank Ken for all his time today. I'd like to thank everyone for attending today and appreciate that everyone took the time to sit in on this. We'd love to get some feedback from you. Feel free to send us a note on that. And with that, Ken, thank you very much. We appreciate your time and appreciate you pulling this together for us. I think we got a lot of good insight from you today. And I like that you brought together two things that I'm very passionate about: digital technology and continuous improvement. So I appreciate your presentation today.
You're welcome.
Also, we're putting up here Ken's contact information. If anyone wants to reach out to Ken, get a little bit more information, feel free to do that. I know Ken would be happy to hear from you. And if you have any feedback on the webinar series or anything else you'd like to hear or see, any topics you'd like to see, by all means, drop me a line, give me a call, or send me an email with topics that you'd like to see in the future. Appreciate everyone's time. Everyone have a great day.